So our render is complete on this one. The next thing we want to do is take a little closer look at the actual material we have on this vase that we've created. And material becomes a very important thing because this is what's actually determining how that light goes through and how it's scattered out. So let's take a look at that. We're going to go to our material editor. And inside of our material editor, we're going to find we've got a couple of materials in here. We've got one for the floor, the environment that we're on. We've got one for the sticks. And we also have one for the glass object. Now the glass object, we're simply using just architectural design materials for this and some of the templates. And we're going to go ahead and just recreate that material just so we can see some of the properties that we're looking at adjusting. So the first thing we want to do is change this material type from a standard to an architectural design. And once it changes over, what we want to do is we want to focus on one of the templates. We could go through here and adjust each one of these manually. Our best bet is to use some of the templates, get it close to what we want, and then make those subtle adjustments. So we're going to go in here, we're going to look for one of our transparent materials, and we've got an option for a solid geometry glass. So let's go ahead and select on that one. That'll give us a good type of glass to work from. Now below that we've got some main material parameters, and in here some of these options are pretty straightforward. We've got our diffuse if we want to apply some diffuse to it, the color, we've got some reflection. The reflectivity, we could actually bump this down just a little bit. Instead of the 1.0, the full, let's go ahead and take this down to about a 0.7. We're going to knock it down just a little. We have our color type for the reflections, we've got our color type for the refraction, the transparency and glossiness at 1.0 is just fine. One of the numbers that we do want to take a peek at is the IOR. This is our index of refraction. The index of refraction is a number that's going to be used by manufacturers to identify each one of the types of glass materials that we're using. So every type of glass has its own IOR setting. If you're looking to actually be more specific to an object, you can actually look that number up online and then plug it into here for more of a real-world, physically accurate setting. Now for ours, we're going to change our IOR setting from a 1.5 to about 1.52. It's going to give us a nice effect. Now as we continue down, let's go ahead and scrub down just a little bit. We also have our BRDF. Now the BRDF is short for what is really a big word. We've got a bidirectional reflectance distribution function. That's what that stands for. Now what does that actually mean? For what this does, this is really about the reflectivity, which is based on the viewing angle. So as my viewing angle changes, the reflectivity that we're seeing on that surface is going to be adjusting. So in here, we have our options. We're going to see one that says, well, we can actually use it by our IOR setting. This is our Fresnel reflection. So it's actually using our number, the IOR up here, and it's doing it automatically for us. Now if we wanted to do custom, we could do a custom. We could set our 0 degree, which is our viewing angle in front of us, our 90 degree, which is basically perpendicular, it's on top of the object. And we could adjust our parameters in here so that we could actually take our curve for our horizontal, and we can knock that up and down. We can take our 90 degree and bump that in and out. And we can actually change the curve shape to pull that in further and to pull that out closer. So you can manually adjust that if you want to. If you understand how the IOR works really well, it's an option if you're trying to tweak it. Your best bet is just to leave it on the automatic and just let those numbers determine that for you. Okay, with the BRDF out of the way, our main material parameters are set. Then this is the material that we're going to be using on top of that object. Now this is just a very important thing to go through, because whenever you're working with the material types, you've got to make sure you set this up, in the right way, the proper way, so that the effect you get is the effect that you actually want. Okay, we'll close that one back out. So as we look to start improving on this, what we want to do is go back to our render setup window. And in our render setup window, we want to look back in our indirect illumination tab and in our caustics and global illumination rollout. And inside of here, we're going to focus in on the caustics group. Now in the caustics group, we enabled it before to turn that on. We enabled the properties on the object to turn it on. Now we have some parameters in here that we can adjust. Now the first one we come to is a multiplier, and this is just the intensity of it. So we could, let's say we bump this up to, let's go for like an 8. If we bump this up, we intensify that, it's going to brighten that up in the scene on that caustic. So let's go ahead and re-render this, just so we can see exactly what it is it's going to do. And as we brighten it, we can start seeing a lot more of that photons being put out and around. You see a lot more of them. It's intensified a lot more. It's not nice and clean and crisp, but you do understand the effect of the multiplier. So if you are trying to intensify it more, you can intensify it here, and then you can continue to clean it back up with some of the other options that we're going to look at. Now I'm going to go ahead and leave this one back at 1.0. This is just a nice, good number to work with. Our next one is our maximum number of photons per sample. This is like our global illumination. We had our photon accuracy. The same thing applies here. The values that we're going to use are a little bit different than what we did in the global illumination. From here, a number up to about 500 is going to do good for us. We're not going to have to take it all the way up to something like 2,000 or 4,000 to make it work well. So if we're taking it up to 300, taking it up to 500, then we'll do well for the sampling. So let's go ahead and just bump this one back up to about, we'll set it at 500. Now below that, we've got our maximum sampling radius, just like below. Same basic procedure. We can turn this one on. By turning it on, we're simply sampling a greater distance around and smoothing out between that. So let's say we leave it at the 1.0 and then re-render this. Now what's basically going to happen is it's going to smooth out our caustic effect. And you can see it smoothed it out too much. We're almost just so blurry that we're not getting any of those nice little clean lines that you expect in a caustic to come through. So by doing this, the maximum sampling, this is the manual process of it. By taking it up to the 1.0, it's too much. So let's say we take this down to something like 0.1, we'll do a 0.2. And we re-render that. Now, by taking it down, we're not going to be smoothing it out as much. We're going to be trying to, keep that a little bit cleaner, give us a little bit more detail. And it has given us more detail, but it's also left us with still being able to see some of these photons in here. It hasn't quite blurred them together very well. So we could continue to play with that number, or we could say Max actually did a pretty good job. It looked good from beforehand. So let's go ahead and just leave it on that automatic mode. Now if you weren't going to leave it on the automatic mode, this would just be a number game. You would just be going back and forth trying to find just that right number to get the effect you want. But we're going to let Max do it for us, so we'll go ahead and take it off the maximum for the manual mode, put it back in the automatic mode. Now below that, we have our option for our filter type. Now our filter type, we've got three different types: a box, a cone, and a Gaussian, or just gauze. The first one is basically a nice in between the two of these, which Gaussian is going to blur it out for us, kind of blur that effect on those edges, and the cone is going to give us a nice clean line and then blur out from there. And the box is basically doing a little bit of both. For Gaussian type effects, the cone is going to work pretty good, so I'm going to suggest leaving it at the cone. Next to that, we've got our filter size, and the filter size, the 1.1 works just fine. The higher you take this number, the more blurred it might get. So the 1.1 actually works really good for you. So let's go ahead and take a render of this, and then we'll bump that filter size up and take a look at that one. Okay, you can see in here we get some nice crisp lines. We're still needing some additional effects. We're needing more photons. One of the things you're going to start finding is that even though we're sampling it out, we're still not quite getting enough photons in the scene to really crisp up the image the way we're going to want that. And we'll look at that in just a minute. But the filter type is going to work just right for us, so we're going to go ahead and hang on to that one. Now below that, we can look at our reuse rollout. And in the reuse rollout, we have an option to actually cache the caustic effect that we have, and it's the same thing that we were doing with global illuminations. The caustics and global illumination is just a photon map. So we can go ahead and write out that photon map, and instead of actually having it do, we'll just do a photon caustics p map, and instead of having to constantly re-render that part of it, we can just do that photon map and it does it for us. So it's a great way to work with it. Okay, now having looked at the caustic information, these are our basic settings that we're going to be working with. Our opaque shadows, when caustics are enabled, does just that. You can check that on or off. With it on, it is going to increase your rendering time by a little bit. Depends on your scene, depends on how it's used. We'll leave it on for the default. Those are good to go. Let's go ahead and look back at our light source actually. Let's take a peek at our light. Now we've got it as far as we can get it with the settings that we have. The next thing that we actually want to do is just start to increase the number of caustic photons in the scene. That's going to give us a higher quality. So instead of let's say the 100,000 that we've got to. Now we don't really need to get up into the millions. I think we can stay below that. Now how do you determine it? Is simply by taking that render. You render it out, you see the quality that you're getting, and then you constantly knock that number down so that you can increase the speed of the render. So you're trying to get it at that in-between balance. You know, having enough photons to get the look that you need within the time frame that you have. So with the caustic photons, let's just go ahead and bump this one up to about a 500,000. This will give us a nice range. Let's just re-render this one. And as it comes in the scene, we can see we've got some really nice crisp lines in here. We've got some nice little caustic effects going on. And it's got just overall, it's a good clean look to it. Now, depending on where the angle of our light is, it's going to change up a lot of how this actually affects. So let's say we were to actually adjust our light source some and pull it down and pull it a little bit closer to it. Now, when we do that, that's going to change up how that caustic effect is. So we'll take a quick re-render of it. Now, because we've actually cached that photon map, we haven't had to go through that whole process again. We can simply just start right into the render. You can see that we can start changing up and adjusting just based on the angle and the distance that that light is from there. Let's go ahead and take a clone of this so we can see this a little more apparently. We'll drag our light in, get it nice and tight down at the bottom, re-render that. There we go, getting a little bit different of an effect from one to the next. Now if we want to get an even different effect out of that light going through it based on the material itself, we can go ahead and go back in to our material and let's make an adjustment on the material itself. Instead of an index of refraction of 1.52, let's go and just change this one up. Let's make this one 1.0. So we'll knock off 0.52 from it, and we'll see what kind of effect we get out of it. We can see in the material here that it has changed it up inside the material editor, which means that we're definitely going to get a different effect out of it from in here. So let's again make a clone of it, and we'll re-render it. Okay, with that one rendered out, we can see that we're definitely getting a different type of effect inside of the scene. It's going to change it up based on that material. So every type of material, from a wine to water to diamonds to the glass, they're all going to have a different index of refraction. And you want to be able to look up those numbers. You can Google it, you can find it, and then you can even just play around with the number inside the material editor and get different effects as you render with it. And you can also get those different effects by simply changing up the position of the light as you work within your scene. Okay, that's going to do it for our caustics for mental ray. Hope you enjoyed it, and happy rendering.